Hey guys, welcome back to a new video. We are talking about how you can get into what is arguably one of the most difficult types of photography, astrophotography. So I love astrophotography because the results can be stunning if you do it right. And I also just find it really fun to just be out in the night in the middle of nowhere in just the pitch black taking photos of stars. I don't know, something about it. The reason I say astrophotography is difficult is because you got to put a lot of planning into it beforehand, and you got to really know how to use your camera properly to get the best results out of it. There's also a lot of editing that goes into astrophotography to sort of bring the photos to life, because right out of camera they don't look all that amazing. But here are a couple photos I took recently. I really like how these turned out, and I want to keep messing around with it and try and get some even better result. But let's get into it. So first of all, what equipment are you going to need? You're going to need a camera that has a manual mode that allows you to do a long shutter speed. We're talking up to 30-second exposures. Ideally, the camera should be decent at handling high ISO, but if you can't get that, that's fine. Now you're also going to need a wide-angle lens. Again, ideally one with a low aperture. We're shooting in pitch black here, so we want to be able to bring in as much light as possible. So a wide-angle lens, ideally with a low aperture. The lens I used is this one right here, which is an f4, which isn't that low, and I still got some nice photos with it. So as long as you have something wide angle, you should be fine. And since we're talking about shooting very long exposures, you are most definitely going to need some sort of tripod. All right, now where the planning comes in. You need to be far away from any major city. I'm talking an hour drive away from any major city that has a lot of light pollution, because light pollution will completely ruin this type of photo, and it also spreads really far. So for best results, I would say about an hour away from the nearest city. You also need to get away from any street lights or like exterior house lights or anything like that you might be near, because any little lights, including light from your phone or flashlight, could affect the photo as well. Now in astrophotography, there's something called the rule of 500, which allows you to figure out how long you can make your shutter speed before the Earth's rotation starts to show up in your photos and the stars turn from little points into little streaks across the sky. Now, sometimes you want to go for that effect of the stars streaking across the sky, but if you want to have a photo that doesn't look like it has motion blur, you need to use the rule of 500 to figure out what you can set your shutter speed to before that streaking will happen. So what you do is you take 500 divided by the focal length of your lens. So in my case, we're going to say 16 millimeters. So you take 500 divided by 16, and whatever number you get is the longest amount of time in seconds you can have your shutter speed before it's going to streak. Now, I would always recommend rounding down. So say you do this and it works out to 27 seconds. Well, you can't set 27 seconds on your camera. It's either going to be 25 or 30. So I would recommend going down to 20, because if you go up to 30, you're probably going to start to see that streaking. So the reason you need a wide angle lens is because the wider the shutter, the longer that exposure can be before streaking starts to happen. If you zoom in a bunch, then the rotation of the Earth becomes a lot more obvious. Say with a 200 millimeter lens, you're going to start to see streaking in the stars within about a 3-second shutter speed. And that's not going to let nearly as much light in. Now you want to set your aperture to as low as it will go, and then your ISO probably between 800 and 3200. I would play around in there, do some trial and error and see what works. Now this is important. You cannot rely on the light meter built into your camera for this. You know how you have the little meter where when it says it's 0, it's properly exposed, and then if it moves up, it's overexposed? Your camera is probably going to tell you that the photo is overexposed, but trust me, it's not going to be. So just completely ignore whatever the camera is telling you to do, and you're probably just gonna have to rely on trial and error. Now, another little pro tip is set the shutter timer on your camera to 2 seconds. That way, when you press the shutter button, the motion of you pressing the shutter button isn't going to appear in the photo by shaking the camera. Alright, so now you have your raw photos. It might look a little underwhelming at the moment, but these photos have a ton of potential, especially when you're shooting raw, because you can just bring out so much more detail in the image. So this is how you should edit your photos to get the best results. So first, you'll probably have to increase the exposure a bit so you can see the sky a little better. You can also play around with your tint and temperature settings to get the color of the sky to a sort of unique color. If you want to make it look blue or maybe a little purple, something like that usually looks cool. Now, if you increase the highlights, the whites, the texture slider, or the clarity slider, this is going to bring out a lot more stars in the sky. Keep in mind, adding texture and clarity is also going to add some noise to the photo. Now go down to your sharpening and add a ton of masking so that you're not sharpening the empty space in the sky and not adding more noise than necessary. Now, I like to increase my color noise removal to 100 because I find it doesn't have any negative effects on the photo. But if you drag the luminance noise reduction up too much, then it's going to make the photo look really soft and smooth, which isn't usually a good thing. So I like to set the luminance noise reduction to around 30. Alright, so if you just shot a regular photo of the stars, then this is pretty much all you need to do. But if you did something like I did, where you purposely shot the Milky Way, now here's some local adjustments you can do to really bring out the color in the Milky Way. Alright, so first add a brush adjustment to your Milky Way. Increase the exposure and contrast. You can also increase the dehaze a little bit. Depending on how your photo looks, that might make it look a little interesting. And then if you want to go for a more stylized look, you can add a color tint to your photo that contrasts the color that you set your sky tint to. So I set my sky to more of a bluish green color, so I'm going to make the Milky Way look a little more orange. Now I like to add another radial adjustment on top of that and line it up with the Milky Way, and then just increase the exposure just a little bit and add some clarity. And boom, there you have it. You got a cool Milky Way photo. Now this is another great example of, I always talk about, it's a great camera doesn't make a great photographer, that kind of stuff. Because it's one of my pet peeves when people go like, hey, what camera do you have? I want to take photos like yours. Or like, wow, that's such a nice photo, you must have a good camera. Things like that. And there's truth to the fact that having a nice camera makes your photos better. I'm not denying that. But you can give a really nice camera to someone who doesn't really know what they're doing, and they're not going to be able to take great photos. And this is a great example of it. Now I posted this Milky Way photo to my Instagram a couple weeks ago, and I got a couple DMs of people saying like, hey, I was wondering what camera you have, like I kind of want to do this. The fact that I'm kind of inspiring people to get into photography is great, but it goes a lot deeper than that. And I try to explain that to people without it sounding like I'm discouraging them, because I'm not. But especially with something like astrophotography, where you need to understand how to use manual exposure and how to edit a photo properly, it's not something you can just go out and buy a camera and be like, oh, I'm just gonna go out and capture these cool photos. And that's not me saying if you don't know what you're doing, don't go take astrophotography photos. That's the whole point of this video, is to give you like a surface level knowledge of this so you can try and do this yourself. But just so you know, the first few times you do this, your photos are probably gonna suck. I know mine did. I've been doing astrophotography for years, and I got this result finally after years of practicing and trying to do this. And even this is still like, I want to improve upon this. I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's great that people are being enthusiastic about photography and getting into it. That's amazing. But just don't expect you to get great results just because you bought a nice camera. My first astrophotography pics were on my Canon T3, and they kind of sucked, but I practiced and did them for a while. Here's what one of my first astrophotography photos look like. Ignore the weird editing. Now, if you guys have any more questions about astrophotography that I didn't cover in this video, I'm not an expert in the subject, but I've done it quite a bit now. So if you guys have any questions for me that I didn't get to in this video, then please leave them in the comments down below. I do read all my comments. Just because I don't necessarily reply to it doesn't mean I didn't read it, but if you guys have questions for me, I'll do my best to answer them. Alright, if you guys enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. If you want to see more videos like this, please hit the subscribe button. I have a whole playlist of tutorials you can watch as well. If you want to hear me talk more about astrophotography or any certain type of photography, let me know, because I'm always open to suggestions. Also, social media links and all of my gear are listed in the description. But that about wraps up this video. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.